Welcome to the Industries in Motion podcast from RBC Capital Markets, where we take the time to explore what's new and what's next in today's fast-moving markets to help you stay ahead of the curve. Please listen to the end of this podcast for important disclosures. My name is Peter Dawkins, and I'm the product manager here in London, UK for RBC Capital Markets. And I'm very excited today to be joined by Carl Green, a key member of our business services team. And we're going to be discussing something today that I think has been at the top of almost every news headline over the last few months and maybe even years, but hopefully from an angle that a lot of people have not necessarily considered, and that's AI, but how AI might actually impact the customer service industry. So Carl, thanks again for joining us today. And maybe we can just kind of start with, why do you think this subject of AI has become so topical, and maybe come at it from the angle of customer service as well?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. That's absolutely right. I think that AI has really kicked into people's focus for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's all over the media at the moment. People are well aware of what is happening with Chat GPT. So that's Generative, Predictive, Transformer technology, which is the next generation of artificial intelligence. There's been quite a lot of academic papers that have been written about this and what it might mean for certain industries. And customer service, or also known as the customer experience industry, has been put front and center by some people as potentially being affected. I think some of the leading industry players in customer service have also been talking about it as well, potentially that accelerating levels of automation, which we've seen previously, but I think is likely to pick up pace as we go forward. And I think also lots of observers, just the armchair observers, can see for themselves that with the power of a well-designed generative AI system, that there are lots of tasks at the moment that could be made much slicker and could indeed ultimately one day be automated.
And I think that's why I was so interested in having you on today, because I think so much of the conversation has been about, things like video games or art or programming, how it's going to revolutionize those industries. But I don't think many people spend as much time thinking about the things that they do on a day-to-day basis where could it really impact them. So in your opinion, do you think when we look at customer service, is AI going to revolutionize the industry like some of these other ones, or how do you think the industry is going to change over the next few years?
Yeah, I think that actually, certainly for the foreseeable future, it's going to be an evolutionary process. I think people need to bear in mind that if we look back over the last 15 to 20 years, we've actually had a lot of significant step changes in the delivery of customer experience and customer service. And if we go back in time, we can think about basic voice recognition technologies. So say yes, say no, give me your date of birth, etc., in a verbal format, and a system being able to pick up on that. But latterly, we've also had user interfaces which have been much more well designed, particularly on mobile apps. We've had people self-serving on the internet. We've had some reasonably well advanced chatbots which can deal with some of the more basic queries. But I think that all of those applications have led to a degree of frustration from consumers and citizens as to whether they can get the answers they want as quickly as they want. And I think, therefore, adoption hasn't been quite as great as people were perhaps predicting 10 years ago. So I think self-service is going to be the real watchword here. But I think that the way that it's implemented, as we'll go on to talk about, is going to be in a much more measured way.
And I guess as a follow-up, I'm one of those people that as soon as I get onto the hold button, I'm trying to hit zero to speak to a human. What do you think this actual service will look like? Or maybe you could describe where we could be in 5 years in terms of if I do actually need customer service, or I'm calling up one of these Fortune 500 companies who's using an AI customer service platform. What do you think the experience might look like for somebody in that situation?
Yeah, I think the simple answer to that is that the experience is likely to look much more hybridized. So I think that we'll have a greater integration between self-service upfront in the conversation, assuming it's a voice call, and then humans stepping in at the appropriate point in time. I think people would recognize that already in terms of some of the experiences they've had, but I think people will be surprised at the sophistication of the systems which are in place to actually gauge what you're intending to do, what you hope to achieve from that interaction. And it can be big corporations, but it can also be government departments, it can be healthcare providers. There's a wide range of applications here. It's not just limited to commercial, what we call business to consumer or B2C type environments. So I think it's likely to be hybridized. I think within the customer experience industry, people would describe that as being high touch, high tech. So a combination of the human element, but also a decent tech support level as well. So I think the future is likely to be more efficient. It's likely to be better for users of the experience, and it's likely to be more efficient in terms of the delivery of that service, whether it's corporates doing self-delivery of customer service or whether they're using outsourced CX providers, outsourced customer experience providers.
I think that's really interesting that you've described it as this hybrid approach, because I think a lot of people, when they think of AI, they think, the whole industry is just going to change. And I think it was very apt how you said it's an evolution, not a revolution. But I am curious, if in 5 years we think the industry does look like a hybrid approach, how rapidly do you think we could approach a, fully automated system where I might not even be aware of it, but I won't actually interact with a human being on the other end?
Yeah, I think over the very long term, it is an inevitability here that we will see the vast majority of interactions automated. There will be a trust in systems to deliver accurate information, be able to gauge people's intent, be able to sense their emotional state as well. We'll go back and talk about some of that emotional intelligence a little bit later on, perhaps. But I think in the near term, certainly on a 3 to 5 year view, there are a number of practical obstacles to the implementation of high-level conversational AI solutions where, to your point, you would think you were speaking to a human rather than a robot. I think in terms of the biggest obstacles to implementation, misinformation is a significant risk in terms of what these GPT systems are actually trained on. So they go through vast training programs at the moment in terms of open AI solutions. So that's been basically trained on publicly available information, which is widely accessible on the internet. There are significant security concerns and data protection concerns in place, which makes it much harder to have commercial grade AI systems that have been trained on the requisite level of data that allows them to basically put the neural networks in place to be able to infer what you're asking about and look for the right answers. And, those neural networks have been around for a long time, but the sophistication with which they're being deployed now has taken a step forward. The data privacy is something that's really, it's something very, very important to think about. Cybersecurity goes hand in hand with that. So the ability of these clouds to be hacked as well. You obviously want service providers, whether it's in-house and you're doing it on an arm's length basis, or whether it's a full turnkey solution on an outsourced basis, you've got to be convinced that the cybersecurity is in place. And then there are other ethical dimensions as well in terms of what a generative AI system could do if it knows, in inverted commas, too much about you. There are risks of bias, there are risks of mis-selling. And so the guardrails really needs to be put in place first with very, very low tolerance for mistakes before these systems can be rolled out to their full extent. So that is something which isn't going to happen very quickly. We haven't really even touched on the fact that there are going to be very significant skill shortages in terms of people who are able to implement these systems and do it in an ethically and secure manner. So there are human skill shortages as well, which I think are likely to drive bottlenecks in the system. So I think we're a long way between the theoretical reality of what people can hypothesize about in academic papers that we've reported about to where we're actually operating in 10 years' time. So I think very, very long term, it's going to happen. Automation or large-scale automation is the core scenario, but we've got a long pathway to get there first, and a lot is going to happen on the route down to that nirvana, so to speak.
You just said something that's really interesting to me is that skill shortage, because AI is going to be ballooning everywhere. There's only a finite amount of people that can do it, and there's going to be challenges not just to getting AI for customer service, but AI across all of the industries. So when we look at customer service today, how is the industry structured? Is it in-house? Is it outsourced? And how do you think AI is going to shape the industry? How much is this industry going to change over the next 5, 10, 20 years as AI is actually successfully implemented?
Yeah. So in terms of the industry structure at the moment, approximately a third of the industry is entrusted to outsourced CX providers, and about 2/3 is done in-house. And I think where the outsourced providers pride themselves is that they're very good at marrying up best-in-class technology with emotional intelligence, and that's something which they're majoring on I think, in this new world. I think that as people's expectations of customer service go up, the ability to have someone that is kind of on hand and online in the background when maybe there's an automated element happening, ready to just click from automated solution to human-led solution. And obviously that can be a scenario where someone's maybe having a very delicate conversation about maybe a medical scenario. It could be where a customer support issue just isn't being resolved enough and people start getting in a heightened emotional state, and people can come in and smooth the path rather to an accelerated resolution of people's queries, concerns, or problems. So I think that is something which is going to be increasingly difficult to do, because I think the training that goes behind that is going to become more complicated. I think the expectations of customer service representatives are likely to be going up, and therefore I think it is going to become more of a specialized offering that is put forward. I think, therefore, we're likely to see, certainly over the next decade, an acceleration of outsourcing towards trusted third-party providers. But I don't exclude the possibility that over the very long term, the AI becomes so sophisticated that it can actually start fine-tuning itself, can start tweaking itself, and that effectively it becomes easier to insource or have some of those solutions just bought off the peg. So I think there's a really interesting debate there as to what it looks like in 20 years' time. But I think certainly over the next decade, the big players are going to be seeing increased outsourcing. And I also think that the market share gains will be going up as well, because I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for small and mid-sized outsourced players to compete in terms of global breadth and understanding of global changes in technology. So I think that bigger outsourced CX providers are well positioned at the moment to benefit from these rapid changes we're seeing in the market. I think as well, just in terms of being balanced, what we're likely to see as we see that switch from basically paying people to respond to queries and interactions to something that's more automated and more scalable, is that we will see a deflationary wave that breaks across the industry. Now, the industry has dealt with that for a long time previously. We've dealt with offshoring, which has been deflation. We've dealt with existing automation trends. So it's not new for the industry. They've been dealing with that. And the bigger players generally have been taking what we call a greater share of wallet from the big customers, their big clients. So I think that, in terms of dealing with that deflationary impact on their revenues and potentially better profit margins, that is something which is going to favor bigger players.
And I think that's a really interesting observation, not just the AI within the customer experience realm, but maybe AI in general, is that it's clearly going to be extraordinarily disruptive for these small to medium-sized companies. You can see that consolidation occur, but equally interesting is that after that, it might just disrupt itself again and go back into the hands of the small and mid-sized players. And I do think that speaks to, quite a volatile environment for AI. It's not just going to change it all once. It might change it all again and again. So I think that's a really interesting observation. So I might just follow up on that. And, we've talked about the disruption, the volatility, but I guess looking at it from another angle, what kind of opportunities do you see this industry change creating?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, which I think some of the more skeptical observers in capital markets miss, is that there will be revenue streams being generated in customer experience and customer service, which just don't exist at the moment. And I think a parallel here would be what we've seen in terms of content moderation activities, which 10 years ago, I think people really underestimated the extent to which we'd see vast amounts of user-generated content being put out there into the blogosphere and into the wider internet, and that's generated an industry that's growing at a profound rate to cope with that. And I think that there will be functions that are linked to managing the ethics of AI deployment. There will be massive opportunities in data analytics, in system design, and in general AI deployment and integration with wider corporate systems, where we ultimately see a crossover between CX integrators and classic business process outsourcing, or BPO integrators as well. So I think you're going to see a bit of a clash of cultures. But I think that CX operators at the moment have the advantage that as long as there is a requirement for hybrid systems, and ultimately in some sectors and in some verticals, there will be a requirement almost forever. But having the ability to manage voice and manage those hybrid systems is something which some of these purely digital competitors won't be able to do. So I think that they're in a good position to move out into the world and really capitalize on some of these new revenue streams. Those revenue streams won't be in my models, they won't be in wider consensus models at the moment, but you can guarantee in 5 to 10 years' time, if we were sitting down here again, we'd be talking about these new revenue streams and the extent to which they're growing and supporting an interesting equity story for some of these big outsourced CX providers.
That's really interesting because, now we've talked about the disruption, we've talked about the volatility, we've talked about the opportunity. It's clearly that this is going to be an industry among many that is deeply influenced by the advent of AI. But really, I want to thank you for your time today, because I think this has been a really insightful discussion about an area that will impact all of us on our day-to-day lives, but perhaps that doesn't get as much coverage or attention in the media regarding the potential disruption of AI. So firstly, just thank you. But before we say goodbye, are there any closing thoughts that you might like to add?
Yeah, I think customer service is something we take for granted these days. And I think the outlook is for a better customer service industry going forwards. We'll like to see really profound changes over the very long term. But for the foreseeable future, there is going to be significant demand for sophisticated hybrid solutions that just makes people's lives and interactions with corporations and with government departments much more frictionless, with faster resolution times. And I think that's an all-round social good.
Thank you very much again for your time today, Carl. And as always, thank you everybody for tuning in and listening and watching. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast. And as always, if you enjoyed the discussion, please follow and like on the platforms that you use to listen to podcasts. Thanks very much.
This content is based on information available at the time it was recorded and is for informational purposes only. It is not an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation, and no recommendations are implied. It is outside the scope of this communication to consider whether it is suitable for you and your financial objectives.